Welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. This is your host, David Krayden, broadcasting to you live just from the Ottawa area. And we've got a special guest today. He's always welcome on this show. The intellectual component goes up about 100% when Neil Oliver joins the show. I can't wait to ask Neil some questions and just to talk about the world today. We'll be right back after this.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need the resolve to resist. Yes, please like the show. Subscribe if you haven't already, and resubscribe if YouTube has taken you off the roster. Happens all the time. So without further ado, I want to introduce who really needs no introduction. He has been on the show innumerable times, actually probably 4 or 5 times, and it's always a pleasure to have my good friend from across the ocean, Neil Oliver, archaeologist, author, pundit, and I say philosopher. I think you always have incredibly insightful observations to make about current events. And I don't think that's something everybody can say, but you certainly can. It's always a pleasure to have you on here, Neil. So I know things are crazy in the UK right now, and we'll get into some of that, but I wanted to share this with you just in case you wonder how crazy things are in Canada. Well, this is the mayor of Toronto, Olivia Chow, announcing a new mental health program for the subway. And I'm not making this up.
Yeah, so here, come and say it here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Say, yeah.
Thank you, folks. Just want to let you know we had an incident at Spadina and Queensquay due to that train was streetcar was holding.
We are bringing in mental health worker into the TUC system so that when people are having a mental health issues, we can deal with it very quickly. So that's coming in the end of the year. Because, hey, sometimes people have mental health issues, right? They need to be helped. That is life. Yeah, I know. Oh, here it is. Woo!
So I think the first people the mental health team should visit is Olivia Chow for coming up with this, because you probably won't be able to find a cop anywhere on the subway or the bus system in Toronto. They're always at churches evicting people from churches and blocking the door. That's what the cops do in Toronto now. And of course, they do their best to ignore violent protests everywhere in that city. So that's where we are in Canada here. But before we get into politics of the hour, you were recently in Crete. This really intrigued me because I've always been fascinated by the island because it has such an ancient history, and of course played very prominently in the Second World War, one of the bloodiest airborne invasions in history when the Germans took it over from the British. Very for a very short time. But what were you doing in Crete? I'm fascinated to find out.
Well, nothing more dramatic than a short family holiday. Myself, my wife Trudy, and our 2 boys just had the opportunity to get away to the sun for a while. If you live in Scotland, the opportunity to get some sunshine is something, an opportunity eagerly to be taken. And so it's a place on the island that we've now visited 3 times, simply because the facilities and the location and the climate and the available restaurants and so on provide us with a perfect brief respite from reality, I suppose. And we just go and we read books and we eat some nice food and we have conversations together and swim in the sea. It was no more dedicated a project than that.
Okay, so no Tomb of the Minotaur or anything like that.
We've done a bit of that. We visited on a previous visit to Crete. We've been at Knossos, and we've visited the archaeological remains there. If indeed that is the Palace of Knossos, it's still up for debate. But my youngest son is particularly fascinated with. He loves Greek mythology, Greek legend. He also loves Norse legend and Norse mythology, and he's very well aware of the crossover and the relationship between the two. He's well aware of Crete being the origin point for Zeus. And a great deal of other Greek legend besides. So there has been, and there is, when we're there, the conversation's peppered with that kind of reference. So it's always enriching. I feel like, I don't know, I feel a real empathy with Greece. No reason to. I've got no family there, no blood from there. But anytime I'm there, compared to, I love Spain, I love Italy. I love the Med, but I always feel a sense of homecoming when I go to the Greek islands, but I'm sure it's just something that I've taken as a figment of my own imagination.
Well, I have never been to Greece or Crete. I've been to parts of Europe and never gotten there. I always wanted to. I'm also fascinated by Greek mythology, and the history is just so incredible. Wanted to ask you about, I just noticed this the other day, and the story is probably 2 days old, so I'm sure that's over 500,000 now. This is a petition going on to have a new general election in Britain. How seriously is this being taken? And do you think it's possible that might actually have an outcome of having a new election?
Well, my instinct is that I very much doubt that. That's such a conundrum for me, because I have long since abandoned any faith in democracy as it manifests in the UK, in the West. I have no faith whatever in there being any meaningful distinction between so-called political parties. I subscribe to the concept of the uniparty. I do not accept for a moment that the figures were invited to entertain as leaders, as prime ministers, as foreign secretaries, as chancellors of the exchequer, and so on. They're mere factotums. They're just actors mouthing words penned and written for them by others. They hold no power. They perform no meaningful function. It's all part of a pantomime of distraction that we're invited to watch. I see no point whatever in engaging with that corrupted process. So even were there to be a call for a general election, let's say whatever, I don't know, the king stepped in some hypothetical situation and dissolved parliament or whatever, it would mean nothing. I believe it would mean absolutely nothing. Whoever was brought in, whoever we ended up with, if Starmer was to exit stage left, pursued by a bear, whoever came clattering on from the other side would be more of the same. It's a completely pointless process to me. I don't know, actually. Now I'm so imbued with cynicism now that I don't know if or when general elections and suffrage and the vote ever really mattered. I don't know if there was ever real choice. I don't know if you were ever actually. I suspect in the same way that that it would appear that in the great conflicts of the last few hundred years, the same people have financed and supported both sides or all sides in the conflict. I think the same thing applies to the so-called political process in the countries of the West. I think it's an illusion if you think that you can make a difference by selecting a different party, selecting a different leader. That said, there is absolutely no doubt, I think, that Keir Starmer is widely reviled as Prime Minister. There's probably a short lead of contenders for most unpopular British Prime Minister. He'll certainly be up there. In living memory, he's probably the most unpopular Prime Minister. by a margin, but whether he's the most unpopular ever, I couldn't actually say. But there's definitely it's all part of what is actually I would say a choreographed atmosphere at the moment in Britain, which is being driven by propaganda and bad actors and malice aforethought to create division, to split people and fracture society every which way. This is yet another manifestation of that broader project to create unhappiness, discontent, anxiety, calls for revolution, calls for civil unrest, call for civil war. It's all just parts in the mix. But it comes as no surprise to me to learn that you can put a petition in play and get figures like that back saying we want no more of him, we want something else. But the something else that would ever be offered is more of the same.
So are you disappointed in the Reform Party and Nigel Farage? Because I haven't seen Farage get angry about much lately. He was furious about not being allowed to smoke anymore in London pubs, and he was on the air constantly about that for about a week. But he really was upset when one of the Labour ministers associated him with the infamous Jimmy Savile. And a lot of Canadians don't even know who Jimmy Savile is, and I've been following UK television for years, and I know he was a fixture that was protected by the royal family, the Labour Party, and the Conservative Party. Successive governments protected this guy's behind. And perhaps I shouldn't use that word, but they intervened to make sure he was safe from prosecution, from arrest, from any charges, and he died peacefully without ever having to answer for his crimes, or for that matter, the things he had done to abuse children throughout his entire career. But I found this interesting that Nigel Farage really got upset about this and seemed to put him back in the news for a while. But I'm a proponent of the uniparty too, Neil, and I see it not only in the UK, increasingly in Canada, where it's hard to differentiate between the Conservatives and the Liberals. And unfortunately, I'm worried that it's also occurring in the United States. There's an incredible lack of distinction now between Republicans and Democrats on some key issues. And Donald Trump has disappointed me frequently over the last 6 months. But would you say Farage has provided any sort of opportunity for real opposition in Britain? And is he really an alternative, or is this going to be more of the same? If, in fact, and I don't imagine he's going to win the next election, but if he did, would it be a real change, or is he part of the uniparty as well?
I think it's more helpful in a way. It doesn't matter to me who it is. I mean, you've bracketed together there, inadvertently or deliberately, Nigel Farage and Donald Trump. Two very different entities. However, I would say that they are beset by the same fundamental problem. It doesn't matter what a person stands up at a podium and says they're going to do if or when elected, because the system within which they choose to operate is corrupted at the subatomic level, making it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter if you're Donald Trump, a billionaire, reality TV star, businessman, looking after massive construction projects in New York and other places in the United States of America, or if you're Nigel Farage, from the financial world, from the money markets. He waged a very successful, absolutely an incredibly successful, decades-long campaign to get Britain out of the European Union. And on paper, at least, he succeeded in that. He pushed it all the way to the referendum, which returned the vote, the largest plebiscite in British history, that Britain should leave the European Union. The fact is, it never happened. The horse fell before it crossed the finishing line, and Brexit never happened, not in any meaningful sense. But we don't need to get into that. But I don't think you cannot, if you get in order to get to the point where you can be elected, I think, metaphorically speaking at least, you have to have sold your soul to the system. No one gets in. Donald Trump, you know, he swam in that toxic goldfish bowl, became part of the toxic goldfish bowl in order to become president of the United States for the second time. Nigel Farage would not be able to proceed and would not become Prime Minister of Britain under the current system, you know, without breathing toxic water through his gills. It's not, you cannot fix, the system in the West cannot be fixed from the inside. I keep saying, well, I've said to people numerous times now, over the Christmas period there, in this house, we had a problem with a broken macerator. And people may or may not know that a macerator is a bit of kit that enables you to have a toilet somewhere where maybe one wasn't designed to be. It's an intermediary measure that does the job for you of preparing waste for the plumbing. I was broke, and we had, and I'll spare you the detail, but it was while I was fixing it with my dad-in-law that it occurred to me that you can't fix that from the inside, because on the inside of the macerator, you're literally submerged in the worst things you can imagine. The only way we were able to fix it was simply to disconnect it, take it out, throw it away, and bring in another one. You can't, it's only from the outside of this dreadful system that we have, which is worse than a blocked and broken macerator. It's only by throwing it away and bringing in something else, abandoning the idea altogether of having a toilet and bathroom in that part of your house. You know, it's that kind of root and branch repair and contemplation of reality that you're up against. So, does Nigel Farage represent real change? No, not because of necessarily any failing on his part or any lack of authenticity or not having his heart in the right place. But as soon as you step into that macerator, you are submerged in filth and you cannot function. So whether you're Nigel Farage, Donald Trump, Alexander the Great, or Ronald McDonald, you cannot do anything meaningful inside that hopelessly corrupted system. Doesn't matter who it is. It's not Nigel's fault. It's not Donald's fault.
Well, that is a fascinating analysis. Now I know what a macerator is, and I didn't know what that.
You don't want to know, David. You don't want to know, but there you go. But our electoral system is a broken macerator, no more and no less.
One big shithouse. Yeah. Okay. This is a fascinating clip. And I'm sure you've probably seen this, but this to me illustrates how politicians can just blindly lie through their teeth about the state of affairs in their country. And this is Keir Starmer sitting down with a little tete-a-tete news conference with Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, of course, asked him about censorship in the UK, and it's not a problem.
You have a successful social media site. There are new powers here to censor your site, state-mandated powers.
To censor my site?
To censor your site and Twitter
Truth?
and Facebook.
Truth,
I mean Truth. Is that okay?
Well, I don't think he's going to censor my site because I say only good things. Will you please uncensor my site?
Yeah, we're not censoring anyone. We've got some measures which are there to protect children, in particular from sites like suicide sites. We've had too many cases in the United Kingdom of young children taking their own lives, and when you look through their social media, they've been accessing sites which talk about suicide and encouraging, if you like, children down that road, and that is what we want to stop. There's nothing about censoring free speech.
But that treats all adults like children.
This country is the proud.
But that can treat all adults like
children.
Free speech
in this country has been for a very long time. We're very, very proud of it.
Well, apparently not very proud of it. He seems to be aware of the Magna Carta. I think that's what he's referring to when he says free speech has been around for a long time. Yeah, but not much longer with Keir Starmer in charge. What about these thousands of people that were thrown in jail for writing posts about mass migration that they didn't quite agree with? What about they actually had to let real criminals out of jail to make room for the so-called how did he put it? The keyboard warriors that he wanted to jail. This is just absolute prevarication. This is just outrageous mendacity. And he says it with a straight face. And I don't know if Donald Trump's even aware of the thousands of people, literally thousands of people thrown in jail for posts on social media. Certainly Keir Starmer's aware of it. He was all behind it. But you find it amazing that politicians can lie with that kind of ease. I just found this incredible.
It is barefaced lying. It's very hard. It's very hard to watch for numerous reasons. Because a reasonable person, broadly speaking, when lying, that thing about, if to paraphrase it, it's very complicated if you start lying, because you've constantly got to remember how you lied before in order to keep lying. It becomes a more and more twisted Gordian knot of a thing. Whereas if you just tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. If you just tell the truth in the moment, then it's, you don't have to run it through your self-preservation filter. But it's amazing to watch someone who is in a very public position saying things when instantaneously people can remember, because they've seen it, and the receipts, so to speak, are there, the clips are there of the same person having diametrically opposed opinions that they do not refer to when stating their when spouting their latest lie. You watch and you think, how can you possibly be operating as though we don't remember what you said before? And I think Occam's razor suggests that the only conclusion to be drawn is that they know it doesn't matter, that they can just keep on lying because there are no consequences. They're never going to be brought to book for any of it. And they don't live in any kind of ordered reality in which the past matters. They just say the next thing that gets them through the next 5 minutes of interview. I think it's worth pointing out, actually, to the viewers, that the voice that you heard asking the question that initiated that little back and forth between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer was one of my GB News colleagues, a good friend of mine by now, Beverly Turner, who was out in that situation as part of that press pack, and it was conspicuous the way her voice cut through, like lemon juice through fat in a dish. That her voice in more than one instance cut through, and she was asking questions that went viral because she was going right to the heart of the matter in a way that the rest of the jaded and largely corrupted and irrelevant press pack, they couldn't even hope to. But she was cutting through with some of that. But that's another story for another day. But they lie because there are no consequences. It doesn't matter. Gone are the days when a serving politician, or far less a prime minister, would be caught lying and would have to fall on his or her sword. Those days are gone. It doesn't matter. They lie with impunity because there are no and will be no consequences. If and when Keir Starmer goes, as we were discussing previously, it won't be because of any decision made by him. It will be dictated by forces above his pay grade, who will say, right, that's it. That's you're being written out of the soap opera tonight. Here's your here are your departing lines, and this is what you're going to say, and then you'll go away. But once he's gone, consequences will there be none? He'll go off and do something else equally meaningless but probably lucrative, and they're secure in that knowledge that what they say doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, each of them doesn't matter. You're watching a soap opera. It doesn't matter what Keir Starmer says, whether or not he tells the truth, because truth or lies, he's just an actor. He's just a factotum. He's of no relevance to the unfolding reality in which the rest of us live. He's just part of the soap opera pantomime that some are invited to watch and take seriously.
Well, the Online Safety Act continues to unfold, of course, and my prediction is that Mark Carney, our current Prime Minister, will introduce similar legislation. We already had the Online Harms Act. It
That,
failed because
that
we had an
you have to,
election, so it
to pick up.
died with the last parliament. But I predict Mark Carney will change the name of this legislation to exactly what they have in the UK, the Online Safety Act, because that sounds a little less dangerous than the Online Harms Act. And I think that was fairly discredited while it was alive, that bill was alive. So I think he'll change the name of it. But it will be the same bill that Justin Trudeau introduced, and it will have a hate thought crimes component in it, which makes it even worse than what you guys have. But what is this latest wrinkle here with the age verification? I mean, there are millions of people trying to get VPN sites now to avoid this. So how is this going to facilitate more government surveillance in the UK?
Well, it's all part of the relentless march towards ultimately digital identification. Where you won't be able to do anything. You won't be able to shop, travel, do anything without the involvement of your digital identification, which will be tied to your report card, which decides moment by moment whether or not you're the right kind of person to be doing whatever it is you propose to do, and you can be stopped from so doing. And this is just another step along the way. This idea that you have to reveal yourself. That's not an unfortunate term to use in the context of what they're talking about, but you have to have a verified online identity that demonstrates that you're old enough to view whatever the content is that people have got in mind. But it's just an intermediary step on the way towards pinning everyone. But one of the things that we all learned to say, you and I, David, and many other people besides, one of the concepts that we all internalized was, it's never about what they say it's about. The Agenda 2030 is not about saving the planet. And the Ukraine war has got nothing to do with preserving democracy in Ukraine or in the West. And the debacle of the so-called pandemic was nothing to do with public health. It's never about what they say it's about. And so they've got the temerity. Keir Starmer was spouting the same nonsense there. They've got the temerity to suggest that what they're doing is to protect children. It's no more than using children as human shields, metaphorically speaking. They're hiding behind the idea that it's, we've got to do this to, because otherwise little Johnny's going to look at a suicide site and take his own life. Absolute nonsense. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with that. They're just using children as human shields so that they can bring in censorship. And what it's about, it's never about what they say it's about. What it's actually about is the fact that the official narrative, the entity for which Keir Starmer and his ilk are meaningless, two-dimensional factotums. What it's about is that the narrative has completely failed. Too many people now, we've passed a tipping point where too many people are looking on at events and seeing them for what they are. And the internet and social media and the rest have hitherto provided millions, billions of people with the opportunity to say, I can see what's going on there. I can see the little man behind the curtain pretending to be the Wizard of Oz. I know that this isn't how it's, the truth of this is altogether different from the way it's being pushed. And that's the truth. That is the truth. And because the official narrative, as professed by the likes of Keir Starmer, has utterly failed, they have no debate. They can't engage meaningfully and challenge, far less overcome the arguments that are being arranged against their policies. They simply have to shut it down. They're just playing whack-a-mole all the time with the truth. And they've got to censor. They've got to stop people talking because they don't want to hear the truth. That's all it is. And so the online safety bill is not about what they say it's about. The online safety bill is simply a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. They're just censoring people because they've lost the argument and they no longer they have nothing truthful to say. And so they don't want to hear the truth in return. So they've got to shut it all down. That's all it's about. You don't need to read the fine print of what they say it's about, because it's never about what they say it's about.
Yeah, that is so true. It's like they're speaking a different language, and we have to interpret what they're really saying. Now, you mentioned Ukraine. I wanted to touch on that because, of course, there's a summit coming up, apparently, between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And Zelensky might be watching from the hallway someplace, but I don't think he's going to be sitting with the two of them. However, Donald Trump is again this whiplash foreign policy of his. 1 month he's giving arms to Ukraine. The next month he's talking peace. 1 month it's his war. The next month it's Biden's war. He's been flip-flopping on Ukraine ever since he came into office. Looks right now, it seems like he wants this thing to go away. And if Vladimir Putin essentially gets what he's asking for right now, which is Ukraine should not be a member of NATO, obviously, should never have even asked. NATO should never have offered. And I think Russia will probably end up with the Donbass region at the very least after this war. They're not going to walk away and leave all of that land with Ukraine. And so I think probably Donald Trump, as far as I can glean anyway, is going to agree to that. But the European Union is already saying we're going to stand steadfast with Ukraine on this. And of course, we've heard Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron talk about going to war with Russia over Ukraine. I don't think there's any stomach for war with the European people. Do you think there's a remote possibility of the European Union or pieces thereof, such as the UK or France or both, actually moving against Russia if they disagree with the results of this summit?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not the remotest possibility. There are many reasons why not. If you listen to sage commentators, of the likes of Colonel Douglas Macgregor, Scott Ritter, and people, and all manner of people, John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs, analysts who have looked at this, who have been watching the situation, commenting upon it since it began. America cannot take on any more kinetic war. It doesn't. It's shot all its bullets and fired all its missiles. It's going to take it years to catch up with just the basics. I mean, they're practically at the point where they don't have enough shoelaces for people's boots. Then you get to the Europeans, you get France and Britain. Absolutely, Britain's got more horses than it's got tanks. It's got no aircraft for its aircraft carriers. Its army, its standing army, would fit inside a mid-table football stadium in the United Kingdom. There's hardly anybody there. So the very idea is nonsensical. And then, of course, they have the temerity to use the C word, which in this context is conscription. Where they talk about the youngsters of Britain and other European countries having to face the prospect of standing to with a rifle bayonet fixed to go in and get vaporized on wherever the Russians decided to vaporize them. It's never going to happen. But I suppose more fundamental, the bigger problem that the baddies have is that the globalist project for decades has been predicated on persuading people that there's no such thing as countries, no such thing as nation states, that it's an outmoded idea that everybody belongs anywhere, that no one has a place to call home. Why should they? Here in Britain, we've been bombarded with the idea that our history is shameful, imperial, colonialist, racist, xenophobic, all of the rest of it. You've got second, third, fourth generations coming through, growing up now into adulthood, who've internalized that. And then late in the day, you have people like Keir Starmer and others suggest that teenagers should fight for their country. When they've been told, and their parents were told, and their grandparents were told, that their country was a shameful place. Stand up for what? Defend what? Those people who've internalized all that shame and self-loathing about Britain. Why would I defend it? For the same reason that people don't assimilate with Britain. Why would you assimilate with a place that's so ashamed of itself? Why would you go and join a country where the thing to do in order to assimilate is to think that you've joined a country that's had its day and ought to be replaced by something better, more modern, and more DEI? So the fundamental impossibilities of getting a European British population mobilized against Russia, it's a complete non-starter. And you mentioned the fact that there's this much vaunted conversation going to take place between President Donald Trump of the United States of America and Vladimir Putin of Russia, to establish a peace. For the longest time, the likes of us were talking about how whatever else was happening in Ukraine, it was a proxy war. It was NATO, open brackets, the United States of America, close brackets, prosecuting an intention to take down, regime change, balkanize the Russian Federation, whatever. But if you said it was a proxy war, you were ridiculed and or shut down. And yet, look what's happening. Who's going to sit down to discuss peace? It's not Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. It's his dad. It's his boss. It might have been Biden, but the musical chairs moved and the music stopped again, and the person that sat down in that seat or took that parcel in the pass the parcel game was Donald Trump. He's going to go and discuss the peace with Putin because it was a war between America / NATO, whatever, and Russia. Ukraine was just a proxy, just another factotum. Yeah. Everything about it. I find it increasingly difficult to watch it. The nonsensical, lying nature of everything we're being told makes it very hard to watch. You can only hang on to the plot of a movie if it continues to make sense.
Yes.
When you get to the point where it's just gobbledygook and you can see the sets and you can see the director with his clipboard and his megaphone on the edge of the shot saying what's supposed to happen next. Talk about suspension of disbelief. You just can't. And it's so important that then I think, is that a tactic? Are they just making it so ridiculous that people drift away from it because it's unwatchable? So you think, no, I've got to concentrate. I have to remain focused on at least the fundamental importance of this situation because it's absolute nonsense. It makes no sense. Somebody somewhere make it make sense. Everything you factor into it, the Epstein files, the Diddy tapes, the invasion of the purple spiders from Mars, that's next on the schedule apparently to have everybody look at. Everything about it. Let's go and do a live broadcast from Fort Knox and see where all the gold is. It never happens. It's all such an omni shambles that it's as I say, it's becoming increasingly difficult to watch. If you're looking for sense in it, you're not going to find any because it doesn't make any sense beyond the fact that what you've got out there is a clique of very, very wealthy and powerful people moving heaven and earth to try and remain wealthy and in control. And increasingly, they're sliding about on the oil slick of their own creation.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this so not only comical at times, but infuriating because Ukraine is literally annihilating its population with this. We're down to 16-year-olds and people with Down syndrome now.
Yeah, I mean, that's horrible. Let me say, I mean, I've been being deliberately flippant there, but the dread reality is that we're 1 million down. We as a species are 1 million down in Ukraine. And we came out of the First World War. The millions, the tens of millions that were pushed through the meat grinder then, and then another 100 million were pushed through the meat grinder in World War II. And on and on and on. Korean War, Vietnam War, War on Terror, all of it. Ukraine just being the latest hellish iteration of that. And what you're being made to confront there, the situation in Gaza included, is just that the people that are intent on retaining wealth and control will stop at nothing. And the death toll is irrelevant to them. And yes, in the specific context of whatever happens next in Ukraine, it's an obscenity. That's another the much repeated, almost cliched expression about the flower of a generation that was crushed in the 20th century. Well, we were told that we were learning lessons as a species about all of that. It turns out, no. The lesson is it happened before and it'll keep on happening because the meat grinder delivers for these people.
Yeah, and I wasn't for a minute suggesting you were dismissing the
No.
losses here, but people are making hundreds of billions of dollars off of this war, and they don't give a damn how many people are getting killed. These are First World War numbers. The losses are something out of the First World War, and it's incredible to me that nobody seems to think this really matters. Just keep it going, because the object, of course, isn't to win, just to keep the war going. But before I run out of time, I wanted to show you this, because this is so bizarre, and it shows you how people you thought were relatively normal can say the craziest things in this atmosphere. And this, of course, Mike Huckabee, who I used to have a lot of time for. I used to think Mike was a common sense guy. And of course, now he's the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And get this, Huckabee cites the Dresden bombing to defend Israel's Gaza offensive. Bad enough that you're defending the occupation of Gaza and the annihilation of an entire group of people. But to suggest Dresden justifies it? This was one of the most horrific acts of the Second World War committed by the Allies. There was no military value in destroying Dresden. Literally a month and a half before the war ended, 70,000 people died in the firestorm. The town was just one of the oldest cities in Germany. It was purely vindictive, and just huge losses of human life for absolutely no reason. But here's Mike Huckabee, an evangelical Christian pastor, who is suggesting good for Israel because it's just like Dresden. And I don't know what I could compare that to. It's almost like saying good for Israel. It reminds me of Auschwitz. And it's incredible how the lack of coherent thought amongst politicians today is advertised. And of course, I don't think Mike's going to excuse these remarks. I don't think he's going to come out and say, I really didn't mean that. He'll double down on it because they don't think like normal people anymore. And I just found that to be absolutely absurd, but horrifically absurd.
I've said for years, completely unconnected to any of this, that as a reader, reading's really what I mostly do, and my life was changed in whatever age I was when I read it by Slaughterhouse-Five, a novel by Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes, I know.
And my life, I've said that before, and I mean it it's not hyperbole. My perspective, the way in which I viewed the very texture of reality was altered by that relatively slim novel, Slaughterhouse-Five. And the book, it very much orbits around the firebombing of Dresden. And Kurt Vonnegut was witnessed the aftermath of Dresden as a young soldier in World War II. And clearly his reality was permanently altered by it. And I'm not going to start offering a synopsis of the novel, but the main sort of hero, anti-hero of the book, he becomes, to quote the book, unstuck in time. He's jolted out of reality and into sort of a parallel reality because of it all, because of World War II, because of Dresden, because of everything that he experiences. And, as you rightly described, Dresden is an atrocity. Dresden is a war crime. That there was nobody there. There was nothing militarily to be gained from dropping so much high explosive onto that city, populated in large part by women and children and old people. It was only to terrify everyone else by the sheer might that was at the disposal of the Allies before the dropping of the atomic bombs, and so on and so on. And, in the novel, he writes about everywhere they could see what they thought at first what Vonnegut thought were just logs, blackened logs. And then he realized that each one of these blackened logs had been a person. They were just being incinerated by it. And that anyone, Huckabee or anybody would find a rationale or a justification for invoking Dresden as as being on the side of right, as being on the side of morality. And as you say, as an evangelical Christian, to imagine, you're invited to think that he's someone that thinks that Jesus Christ is sort of looking over his shoulder and watching what he does. And that so there with him presumably imagining the omnipresence of his Saviour, that he would invoke Dresden as though in his imagination, Jesus is standing over his right shoulder, nodding in approval. That's right, my boy, you've learned the lesson. 2,000 years ago, I incarnated on this earth to show the righteous path. And absolutely, Dresden was a big landmark along the way to where we need to be. It beggars belief. That's all I can say. Again, one looks on at world events in the hope of making sense, of arriving at an understanding, and then you see a little snippet like that and you think, I do not understand.
Yeah, and I want to say too, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, that was very influential in my life as well. I used to defend every American war as being absolutely necessary until I realized the objective was never to win any of these wars. It was to sell armaments to make money for the military industrial establishment. And also an excellent book by David Irving on Dresden, which I read quite some time ago. That was decades before he sort of lost his way, but he was one of the first British historians to objectively look at Dresden as you said, as a war crime and a completely unnecessary act of hostility. And it's certainly it's still worth reading if you can find it anywhere. I know most of his books have been banished. Can't even get them on the internet anymore. But excellent book on Dresden. And I think that's probably all I wanted to ask you today. Maybe one parting question. Do you think King Charles will destroy the monarchy by being this globalist emissary? And it's amazing to me the comments I get now from people in Canada who tell me they're a lifelong monarchist. And of course, I was in the military. I had a Queen's Commission when I was in. I was very proud of that, and I was always a monarchist. I don't know if I can call myself that anymore because of the outrageous comments from King Charles. I don't know how long he's going to be there, but I think he's done tremendous damage to the monarchy since he has been there. And a lot of people who were very supportive can no longer find themselves in that position because of they're seeing the royal family literally just fall apart before their eyes.
I think he may just have exposed the reality of it, but by accident or by design, I don't know. But I don't think he's doing anything. I think it's just that whatever there's the guile or the intent to distract from its realities is no longer apparent. You talked about you mentioned Magna Carta, but we live in it seems to me that we just live in a world of hypothetical possibilities. I often think of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America as being a very, very good idea for a country, except that it's never been done. It has not been made real yet, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's a very, very good idea. And in Britain we've got what was traditionally called a constitutional monarchy, and if you look at a constitutional monarchy hypothetically, it would work if everyone acted in good faith within it. I'm no royalist. I'm no monarchist. Never have been. I look on at the fascination that a lot of British people have with the royal family. Buying birthday presents when there's a royal birthday, or and the massive hysteria and delusional behaviour that went on around the time of the death of Diana, Princess of Wales. Now that was the tragic death of a young woman and a mother and so on and so on. Not to downplay that, but the levels that the public grieving got around there, I just looked on at with bewildered awe. But so I've never been a monarchist, but as I say, hypothetically, a constitutional monarchy could work. It could work if you. We don't have time really to go into it. But now I look on at the way in which the reality that King Charles' behaviour has revealed, and I think, well, yes. Well, you'll get your just desserts for revealing that. It is bizarre. It is bizarre that in Britain, you know, for all of that time, the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family that renamed itself Windsor at the time of the Second World War on the advice of Mountbatten, because the thinking was that a Germanic name was not going to play well with the British public at war with Germany, hence Windsor. But that family and the generations, you know, they're all descended from an individual, a European nobility, John William Friso, and they're not alone in that. You know, John William Friso is the progenitor of a lot of European nobility, the Windsor family included, and you think about the fact that the Windsor family and the monarchs from within it operating as constitutional monarchs, you know, what they were able to do, you know, in the 1960s, all sorts of legislation was being brought in by the British government, you know, to make it that you couldn't discriminate in the workplace. You know, you couldn't not employ a black person because it was a black person. You know, that concept was taken away by that legislation. You couldn't discriminate in that way. But on the way to that, going on to the statute books, when it went across the desk of Queen Elizabeth, you know, she made an exemption for the royal households, the properties and the palaces that were hers and that belonged to that family, so that legislation didn't apply to them. And in many articles of items of legislation were, that can apply to everybody else, but it doesn't apply to us. Why doesn't it apply to you? Well, essentially because we're descended from John William Friso. Who's that? Oh, I can barely remember. You know, the whole thing, when it's all a complicated illusion that was being spun, and it kept people persuaded of the significance of that family and the royal family, and how wonderful, how lucky we are to have them. But because of the way King Charles is behaving, which is really only a reflection of the reality of the situation, suddenly the house lights go up in the theatre, and what is revealed is the clapboard sets, the pan-stick makeup, the trap doors, the strings, all the artifice is just laid bare. And now, you know, under the kingship, under the reign of King Charles, everyone is just invited to look on and go, boy, were we had. They got us there.
I'm inclined to agree, Neil. I'm coming to that conclusion myself after decades of not really being there, but I think I am now, and a lot of other Canadians are as well. But very, very eloquently stated as always. And thank you so much for joining me today. And anytime you want me to appear on GB, I'd be happy to do so. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I could talk with you for another hour, but unfortunately,
David,
my time is running out.
I find there's a handful now. There's just a handful of people, maybe slightly more than 5, but you know, 2 handful people with whom I find that I can have conversations now that effectively function for me as therapy sessions, which cue the comments and the comments thing saying that you need therapy. However, I find that I'm with you. I'm able to talk the topics that chime with you, chime with me. And the conversation that we have, I find a great relief. It's like, I find it like stepping into what they call now, and it's a term I don't like, a safe place, a safe space, where I feel like we can just talk like men, we can just talk like fellow travellers, and I find it. So anytime you want to set aside an hour to chat with me, I'll be there. I'll be here.
Okay. Thank you, Neil. And I look forward to getting over to visit you in Scotland, because I have not been over to Europe in too many years now. So want to get back, and I'd love to drop in and say hi.
Come and break bread, have a glass of wine.
Will do.
All right,
thank
David,
you, Neil.
thank you.
Let's stay in touch. We love you on the station, and we watch you faithfully. Bye for now. And of course, there's Neil Oliver, my good friend, and always a pleasure to talk to Neil. Hope you all enjoyed that conversation. That's what it was, a conversation delving with a lot of different things. And I appreciate you watching today. And we'll be back again tomorrow, 10 o'clock. We've got other things lined up for the week. I'll let you know about those tomorrow. Bye for now.